And let's start. So welcome everybody to our, I think, 11th, 10th, can't remember, Kurdish Tuesday. We've had a lot of them anyway. I'm Sarah Glynn, co-convener of Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan. And today we're looking at Sinjar, Shangal, after the genocide. So the city and district of Sinjar in Iraq, or Shangal in Kurdish, erupted onto the world's attention in August 2014, which I think is actually 6 years ago rather than 5, when Daesh began their murderous attack, and many of us heard of the Yazidis for the first time. We watched in horror the reports of massacres and of thousands of families trapped on the mountain where they'd fled for their lives. And we learned of their rescue, not by the mighty armies of the Western powers, but by the Kurdish PKK guerrillas. And we read the accounts of women taken as sex slaves after they'd watched the murder of their husbands and fathers, and of boys forced to become child soldiers. But what's happened since then? Why are we still hearing about attacks on Sinjar, this time from Turkey? And why is the US discussing the area's future with Turkey and with Iraq? Sinjar's been fought over, is still being fought over by the many different forces that are competing for control in this region. So we're very pleased that Thomas Schmidinger has offered to help us make sense of what has happened and is happening. So I think English speakers may be familiar with the translation of Thomas's books on Rojava as a whole and on Afrin. So this is the one on Rojava, and this is the one on Afrin. We put links on the side in the chat in the Zoom. They're also on the event invitation if you're on Facebook to those. And if you've read them, you'll be familiar with his ability to combine sympathy for the Kurdish cause with critical analysis. But he's also written in German on Sinjar, and this has been based on field work that he's carried out over 4 years. So really happy to hand over to Thomas to tell us more about it. I mean, he'll be speaking for, I don't know, Thomas, what, 45 minutes, something like that, and then we'll open to questions. So, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome to everybody and greetings to Scotland or Kurdistan or wherever the audience is. Nice to see you again, at least virtually. Let me share my screen for my presentation to show you my PowerPoint presentation as well. I hope that works now. Just a moment, yes. So actually, yes, it's 6 years ago. And however, the reason why I called my presentation 5 years is that my presentation will be mainly based on my fieldwork in Sinjar and with IDPs, so with internally displaced persons from Sinjar between 2014 and 2019. This was the research that resulted in actually, meanwhile, 2 published texts. One is only in German, and this is this book, The World Has Forgotten Us, Die Welt hat uns vergessen, the genocide of the Islamic State on the Yazidis and the consequences. There is a translation now going on, and it will be published in Pluto Press next year, but until now it's only in English. And just yesterday, a book chapter on the Yazidis, on the displaced Yazidis from Sinjar in English was finally published also in the edited volume. So my research with IDPs from Sinjar in both Kurdistan of Iraq and Rojava, but even in Turkey at the beginning. And my fieldwork in Sinjar was between 2014 and 2019. For obvious reasons, at the moment, I'm unable to go there. And this is why the focus of my presentation will also be on this first 5 years after the genocide, although I will tell you a little bit, of course, of the history and the ethnography of Sinjar before that period, and afterwards also some updates on the recent developments of the last months. Most of you might know the region and might know at least where Sinjar is. Here, this is from Google Maps, and I think this is quite significant because it shows the specific geographic situation of Sinjar. You see this white line is the border between Syria and Iraq, and this long mountain range you see just a couple of kilometers south of the Syrian border is the Sinjar mountain range. For the history of the genocide, I think certain things are important to mention, even I want to focus on the consequences. First of all, this is the last huge mountain range of the Kurdish inhabited territory to the south, and in the regions around it are predominantly Sunni Arabs and not Kurds. Most of them adherents of the Shammar tribe. So it's quite an isolated part of the Kurdish. It's quite isolated from the other Kurdish territories. The second thing is, due to the fact that this is a quite isolated mountain range, it also became something like a refuge for different minorities, mainly the Yazidis, but also other religious minorities. The region was never only a region inhabited by Yazidis. There were also Christians in Shingal, and heterodox Shiites, the so-called Nawawat tribe, and this retreat for the Yazidi population was also a retreat for other minorities. The second thing I want to mention is that the region was always had a quite tribal society, and some of these tribes were actually mixed tribes. So these Ashiret had people of different religious affiliation, and for some of the Yazidis, the fact that they had Sunni members of the tribe and that they had tribal affiliations with Sunni Kurds helped them also to survive the genocide, while others who didn't have these connections suffered much more under the attacks of the so-called Islamic State. The attacks against the Yazidis in Sinjar are not the first jihadist attacks. As most of you might know, there was also a huge attack on August 14, 2007 against two villages where over 500 people were killed with bombs that were placed on tracks that were covered as food tracks. And people thought that they transport food to the villages where they exploded. I don't want to focus too much into detail about the genocide itself, but let me mention at least one thing: the ability of the so-called Islamic State to conquer the city of Sinjar and the villages around the Sinjar mountains was a consequence of the withdrawal of the Peshmerga of the PDK. So without this betrayal that is considered as a betrayal by most of the Yazidis, the Yazidi population, including, of course, the Christians and the Babawat, who all had to flee from the so-called Islamic State, would have been never exposed to this genocidal campaign of the so-called Islamic State. A genocidal campaign that resulted in between 3,000 and 5,000, mainly men, killed by the jihadis, and more than 10,000 abducted, mainly women and children. About 150,000 to 250,000 people were displaced and fled, either meanwhile to European countries, to Australia, or as displaced persons, as internally displaced persons to Iraqi Kurdistan. Before I want to tell you about the situation that followed this genocidal campaign in 2014, I want to show you some pictures from my own research in the region, just that you have some the pictures about the situation after the reconquest of the region by Kurdish fighters of the and Yazidi fighters from different militias. Let's say it like that. We will see afterwards who were the main actors. This is Shingal town in 2016, when the city was still controlled mainly by Peshmerga, by the PDK. The city was really mainly destroyed by actually the fighting between the so-called Islamic State and the Kurdish fighters of both YPG and Peshmerga. And at this time, hardly anybody of the civilians returned. Meanwhile, a part of the civilians returned, mainly Shiite Babawat, more than Yazidis, actually. This is a mass grave close to the city of Shingal. This picture I also took in 2016. At this time, these mass graves were not secured at all. And what you see here is the result of the fact that the Islamic State fighters only covered the bodies of the men they killed with a very little soil, and actually dogs dig the dead bodies out of the soil and ate them. And you could see still in one of the cases, I still could see the key of the car and the clothes and the bones were just lying around. And actually took until 2019 until mass graves were systematically dig out, and the remains were actually, they tried to analyze the DNA to find the relatives of the people that were killed by the so-called Islamic State. These were the pictures still in 2016, so 2 years after the genocide. When the civilians tried to run away from the fighters of the so-called Islamic State, they took refuge in the mountains themselves. These mountains were inhabited and the original home of the Yazidis until the 1970s. So these mountains were full of old villages, but in the 1970s, the Ba'ath regime of Iraq deported nearly all of these inhabitants of the villages away from the mountain to collective towns that were controlled by the Iraqi regime around the mountain. This fact that the Iraqi regime destroyed the villages in the mountains and resettled the people in the lowlands around the mountain was actually the reason why the Islamic State could overrun them. And the people fled back to the region where their grandfathers actually were deported in the 1970s. About 5,000 people never left the mountain. So when the YPG opened the corridor for the civilians on the mountain to flee to Syria about 2 weeks after the beginning of the massacres, most of the civilians who fled to the mountain continued to Syria, and the largest group of them later on back to Iraqi Kurdistan. But a part of the displaced persons stayed on the mountain, and they never left the mountain until today. And they still live in these tents. Some of them started to build small houses and started gardening on the top of the mountain. This is in a region called Zerdasht, which is more or less a plain on the top of the mountain. Now let me talk about the different militias and the situation that led to the present actually conflict about Sinjar. This is the situation in July 2017. I will tell you later the development until this situation was continued since then. In a very small region inhabited by a few thousand people, in July 2017, we had 4 different rival military forces that were all Yazidi forces, but Yazidi forces who had different affiliates and who were supported by different forces. How did this situation actually came into place? The Yazidis were always on the margin of Iraqi and also Kurdish politics. So they never had a strong military force for their own. And when the Islamic State attacked the region, different Yazidis searched for the support and the help of different non-Yazidi political forces. Actually, I mentioned already one of them, the YPG, the People's Defense Force of the Syrian Kurds, affiliated with the Workers' Party of Kurdistan, PKK. They played a very crucial role for opening this corridor and rescuing the civilians, but they also supported a Yazidi militia that was built up with the support of the YPG and the PKK, the defense forces of Shengal YBS. Then there was a Yazidi unit of the Peshmerga of the PDK, commanded by Qasim Jesho, a Yazidi militia, independent from the PDK, but at this time strongly under the pressure of the PDK and included into the Peshmerga units led by the nephew of Qasim Jesho, the so-called HPE, Hessen Palästina Yazid Khan. And finally, there was the Hasht Shabi unit that was also a Yazidi unit. At this time, the south, the northeast of the region was controlled by the Peshmerga, including the town of Shingal. Qasim Jesho claimed that he has 10,000 fighters under his command, although I really doubt that number. And we know that many of the commanders of Peshmerga and also of other units in the region exaggerate numbers of fighters because they get the money for each fighter and they keep some of them for themselves. The second unit, I told you already, commanded by the nephew of Qasim Jesho, was the Heza Palestina Ezid Khan, originally established as Heza Palestina Shingal. So the the defense force of Shingal or the defense force of Ezid Khan. Haidar Jesho, the nephew of Qasim Jesho, was originally a PUK politician. So he was originally a member of the Iraqi parliament also, and a member of the party of the former Iraqi president Jalal Talabani. And he tried to establish a militia that wanted to be independent from all Kurdish and Iraqi forces. However, the result of that was that his militia was very weak. He had no funding, just some donations of other Yazidis in the diaspora mainly. And also the party he founded in spring 2017, the Yazidi Democratic Party, did not really gain a lot of support. With renaming his militia from Heza Palestina Shingal to Heza Palestina Ezid Khan, he also somehow made a tribute to a kind of soft Yazidi nationalism. What does that mean? Ezid Khan is the land of the Yazidis, and he tried to distance himself somehow from the Kurds. A trend that existed after 2014 in many Yazidi families, actually, because they thought that the Kurds betrayed them. I just want to remind you on the fact that the PKK Peshmerga withdrew from Iraq, and that this was seen as a betrayal, of course. The relative weakness of his militia, because he did not have the support of a strong force, led to the fact that he was abducted by the PDK and under strong pressure to unify his forces with the PDK Peshmerga. And actually, he had to do that in spring 2017. But as soon as the PDK withdrew from the region in October 2017, he did another move and registered his militia with Baghdad. So the result actually of the goal to establish an independent Yazidi force was actually the fact that he was depending from different Kurdish and Iraqi forces. The third group is the Yakinian Berkhvedane Shingal. This is the defense force of Shingal, and this is the militia that was supported by the PKK and the YPG. They played an important role, especially in the west of Shingal, and they control until today the northwest of the Shingal region, resulting in a lot of attacks by Turkey, but I will come later on. They claim to have about 2,000 fighters. I also doubt that number. However, they are affiliated with YPG and PKK, and they also follow the ideology of democratic confederalism, the ideology established by Abdullah Öcalan. I guess you all know that. And like the HDP of Haydar Şeşo, they also started their own political party in 2017, called PADE, the Partia Azadi Demokrat Yazidi, so the Party of Democratic Freedom of the Yazidis. And as all of the groups affiliated with the PKK, they also have a female wing called the Defense Forces, the Women Defense Forces of Shingal. They claim to have about 500 fighters, and of course they support the PADE party as well, and are the female wing of the party, including, of course, they support also the democratic confederalism and genealogy, the feminist feminist ideas of the PKK. Now let's come to the south of the region. The south of Shingal was controlled by ISIS until May 2017. So when Shingal city was liberated in 2015, all the Kurdish forces that liberated Shingal together, the PKK and the PDK, stopped on a kind of unofficial ceasefire line and did not continue their attack further to the south. Actually, the Americans told them to stop their advance against the so-called Islamic State, because the United States feared that if PKK and PDK would continue further to the south, this would cause problems with Baghdad, and this would cause troubles within the unity of the forces that fight against the so-called Islamic State. So they had to stop their advance. The result of this was that people who came from the villages in the south of Shingal lost their trust and their patience and searched for support by Baghdad. And in May 2017, Baghdad supported the establishment of a people's mobilization unit of these southern Shingalis, and they liberated the south of Shingal in May 2017. So since May 2017, besides Yebesh, HPE, and Peshmerga of the PDK, also Yazidi People's Mobilization Unit controlled parts of the Shingal region. Here on the picture, you see the main base of the Yazidi PMUs in Shingal town. So let's follow a bit these territorial changes in the region. I'm sorry that these maps here are in German. They are maps from my book in German. That's why but maybe it's anyway too small so that you cannot read the script. I don't know. This is the situation between November 2015 and May 2017. So between the liberation of Shingal city and the liberation of the south of the region by the Yazidi PMU, the Yazidi Hashd-Shabi. You see to the northwest, the region with the main settlement of Khanasor, The region was controlled by pro-PKK forces, the YPG, together with YPG and HPG, the military force of the PKK. To the northeast, the region was mainly controlled by the Peshmerga of the PDK, including the city of Sinjar. And then there was a little territory, especially around the holy, the most sacred place in Shingal Sherfedin, that was controlled by the HPE of Haidar Shesh. In reality, the situation was a little bit more complicated than this map, because what you see here in the center of the mountain, the IDP camps, there the situation was much more complicated. When you drove with the car from Sinuni in the north to the last villages that still exist in the mountain itself, in Kerse to Kolko, then you come to the tents of the Yazidis. At this time, it looked like this, that when you left Sinuni, you crossed the last checkpoint of the PDK Peshmerga, and then you cross checkpoint of the YPG, and then you come into a territory that is actually neither controlled by YPG nor the PDK, but has civilian structures of both movements. And they tried not to come into troubles with each other, but actually it was a kind of neutral zone where both PKK affiliated Yazidis and PDK affiliated Yazidis were active with humanitarian aid, with political groups, and so on. Then in May 2017, already in March 2017, I forgot that, already in March 2017, there were the first armed clashes between different Kurdish militias in the region. Masoud Barzani, the head of the PDK, put militias from Syria on the Iraqi and Syrian border in Shingal, the so-called Rojava Peshmerga, or Rosh Peshmerga. These are Syrian Kurds who are affiliated with the Kurdish National Council, ANKS, which is the umbrella organization of Kurdish parties more or less affiliated with the PDK in Iraq. So at this time, this was before the negotiations of this year that led to some kind of understanding between the ANKS and the PYD in Syria. At this time, the ANKS was in strong opposition towards the PYD and the self-administration of Rojava, and especially the PKK. So Barzani thought, if I put these people on the border between Syria and Iraq, they will make sure that the contact between the YPG, the pro-PKK Yazidis in Iraq, in Sinjar, and the YPG will be different. And actually, in March, on 3rd of March 2017, the situation really led to a kind of a short shooting that ended with a US mediated ceasefire. But this shows how tense the situation between the pro-PKK and the PDK forces in the region were. Well, in May 2017, the People's Mobilization Units, the Hashtashabis, the Yazidi Hashtashabis, took over the south of Shingal and liberated the last Yazidi villages. However, the so-called Islamic State was still present for a while to the south of that, especially in Baj, a village that is one of the main, one of the Arab Sunni villages that supported ISIS quite a lot. However, in October 2017, the situation changed again, because after the failed attempt of Masoud Barzani to create an independent Kurdish state in Iraqi Kurdistan with the referendum in September, the Peshmerga had to withdraw from the region, and the Iraqi army, together with the Yazidi Hashdshabis, took over the territory that was controlled by the PDK, including some of the villages that were controlled by the HPE. And additionally, the Yebeesh forces took over Zinuni. They withdrew later on from Zinuni, and now Zinuni is in a kind of shared control between Yebeesh and the Iraqi army. And this map still doesn't show exactly what the situation is now, because two of the villages in the south, Tel Zer and Sivar Sheikh Khidr, were later on handed over from the Hashdshabis to the Yebeesh. However, you can imagine how the situation is now. The HPE, so the militia of Haidar Shesho, stayed in the region in Sherfedin, and Qasim Shesho, his uncle, the commander of the PDK Peshmerga, also did not completely withdraw from the region. He fled to Sherfedin and is now more or less under the protection of his nephew and some of his PDK, some of his Yazidi PDK fighters as well. So the PDK is still there, but only in Sherfedin, and most of the territory is now controlled by the Iraqi army and the Yazidi Hashdshabis. There are also some Shiite Hashdshabis in the region. Some of them include local Shiites from the Babawat tribe. Before I come to the present situation, let me talk about my researches about the IDPs. Mainly, I did interviews with them in 2017 and 2018, but I started with that already in 2014. This is the situation how it was in 2017 at the moment when the Iraqi army took over the main region of Shingal. About 60,000 people at this time already went to Europe and left Iraq completely. There were still about 5,000 IDPs in Rojava, mainly in a camp called Nevros camp near Derik. Most of these people, meanwhile, returned to Shingal, some of them also to Iraqi Kurdistan, but meanwhile, most of them are back in Iraq. Most refugees who took refuge in Turkey already left in 2015 and 2016. Some of them returned to Iraq, but the majority of them continued to flee to Europe, especially to Germany, where there is already a large Yazidi diaspora from Turkey. Between 150,000 to 200,000 were in Iraq, and altogether there were 28,425 families in IDP camps in Dohuk. So so 82% of the total numbers of IDPs lived actually in the province of Dohuk. Most of them close to the other Yazidi main settlement around Shekhan, with the most sacred Yazidi place in Lades. And there were additional to these camps also Yazidis who lived off camp in Shekhan and Dohuk mainly. A part of this IDP population was especially vulnerable, and some of these especially vulnerable IDPs were later on transferred with programs, for example, to the German federal state of Baden-Württemberg, and some of them also to Australia. These were especially former enslaved women who were captured by ISIS and raped. Some of them widows, including captured children or people with chronic disease. Let me show you also some pictures from these camps. This is a picture from New Year 2014, 2015 from Hanke, and one of the IDP camps close to Shingal in the close to Shekhan in the province of Dohuk. People were living in these tents, and until now, most of these people still live in the same tents. The tents just became worse in these years. One part of this camp was more structured and more organized than the informal camp, but with this organization, also more political control was involved. This is a picture I took just before the referendum. This is the entrance of the camp. So you see at the entrance of the camp that this is PDK territory. And I was in the camp in May 2017 when the Hashtashabis took over the south of the region. And back then the PDK even made a public meeting in the camp where they told people to come, yes, people were more or less forced to join the meeting. And this is a picture of the meeting. And in the meeting, they gave speeches where they really also threatened family members of Hashtashabis that they would have no space in Kurdistan if they support the Hashtashabis and the government of Iraq taking over the south of Shingal. This is, by the way, a barrack of a UN organization inside the camp where they made them. There are also other camps where these refugees were living in tents. For example, the Sharia camp is one of the biggest as well. In all of these camps, people lived and still live in these tents. Also in Syrian Kurdistan, at this time, there was still this camp called Nevros camp, where about 5,000 Yazidis lived. However, these camps were under control of the pro-PKK forces, and as I told you already, most of them already returned meanwhile to the region of Hamasoul. So in mainly 2017, but also later on, I made interviews with Yazidi IDPs in Iraqi Kurdistan and asked them about their living conditions, but also about their opinions, why they cannot, or why they think they cannot return to Shingal. And actually, one of the results was that many of the civilians feared that the rivalry of different militias could lead to a civil war within the Yazidi militias, between the different militias. Most of them did not see any future for the Yazidis in Iraq or in Kurdistan, and wished to migrate to Europe. However, they knew that meanwhile the prices for smugglers to Europe were that high that many of them will never ever reach Europe. In 2017, there was also a lot of fear that the plans of Masoud Barzani to create an independent Kurdish state in Iraqi Kurdistan could lead to a partition, a formal partition of Shingal between a Kurdish state and Iraq. This fear disappeared in 2018 because the attempts to create a Kurdish state failed. However, although many of the Yazidis had different political affiliations and different opinions about the future of Shingal, should it be part of a Kurdish state, should it be part of the Kurdish autonomy or not, should it be part of Iraq or not, there was one thing where most of the people I did interviews with agreed, and this is that Shingal should have some kind of autonomy, either inside Iraq or inside the Kurdish region of Iraq. Some fought together with the predominantly Christian Nineveh plains, but all of them wanted a separation from the province of Nineveh, with the capital of Mosul, because they did not trust their Sunni Arab neighbors anymore, and they wanted to have their independent or autonomous structures within Iraq, including an autonomous defense force that would be able to defend the Yazidis if anything like that happens again. So what happened actually to the kidnapped girls, women, and children? Until now, more than 2,800 of them are still missing. And the interesting and really depressing fact is that until now, I think the last case was about 2 weeks ago, kidnapped women and children are found in prison camps in Syria, where ISIS women are held, especially in Al-Hol, and in Turkey. So some of the slave owners, some of the ISIS supporters who enslaved Yazidis brought Yazidi children even to Turkey, where recently was just a case where some children were brought back to Iraq. And on the other hand, there are Yazidi women who were captured together with the ISIS women in Baruz, in the last stronghold of ISIS, and are now living in Al-Hol camp. The picture you see here is a picture with some special forces of the YPG with the Al-Hol camp in the background. Al-Hol camp is really a disaster. I visited the camp twice, and actually the camp is only so far under control of the Syrian Democratic Forces that they manage to control who enters and leaves the camp most of the times. There are even cases where people are smuggled out of the camp, But the main problem, I think, is that inside the camp, the old structures of the so-called Islamic State are still active. So the women of the ISIS moral police, so-called Hizbah, are still active in the camp and control that other women are still behaving the way ISIS wants women to behave. And there are still cases where women are killed by other women inside the camp because they they think that they should be killed according to their interpretation of Sharia law. And many of the Yazidi victims of ISIS fear that if they would tell the Syrian Democratic Forces that they are actually victims of ISIS, maybe the ISIS women would be faster to kill them before the Kurds could rescue them. But it's not only fear from other ISIS inmates that causes the fact that some of these women are not telling that they are actually Yazidis and not ISIS women. There are also other problems. One of them is that many of these women are also afraid from their families, from their Yazidi families. As you might know, the Yazidi society of Shingal is the most conservative Yazidi society you can find in Kurdistan. So the way of living and values of Shingali Yazidis are much more conservative, for example, than the Yazidis from Afrin. And many of the women fear that the fact that they were raped by ISIS fighters would lead to violence against them by their own family. And the next problem is what to do with the children of rape. So many of these kidnapped women do have one or several children that were whose fathers are jihadis, Sunni jihadis, and it's clear that for the Yazidi religious establishment that these children are not Yazidis, and most of the families don't want to have these children who are considered as being Muslims. They don't want to have these children back and don't want to have them in their families. I even had a lot of discussions with diaspora Yazidis about that. And of course, there are progressive Yazidis who see that different, but even many of the Yazidis in Germany, when you discuss in online forums about this question, clearly say these are Muslims. They are Muslims by Islamic law, by Sharia law. They are Muslims by Yazidi law. We don't want to have our enemies in our families. We don't want to raise our own enemies. Some of them are also afraid of the fact that Yazidi families would raise Muslim children would be another reason for jihadis for future attacks. So all in all, we have to say if these women return to their families in Iraq, they are more or less forced to leave their children. And some of them want to leave them, and I think it's absolutely legitimate that a woman that was raped that doesn't want their children, but some of them do not want to leave their children. This really causes an additional trauma for this decision causes for many women an additional trauma. And most of the children actually of these women who return are adopted by Kurdish families in Syria. At the end, I want to focus on one of the biggest problems for the Yazidis who returned to Sinjar. The fact that the PKK and the YPG played a crucial role to rescue Yazidi civilians, but also that the PKK stayed in the region, at least until recently. Meanwhile, the PKK is officially not in the region anymore. They withdrew, but the pro-PKK YPG is still in the region. And from a Turkish perspective, this is just a part of the PKK and doesn't make any difference. So for Turkey, this is a reason to attack the region several times. Already on 25th of April 2017, Turkey attacked different Peshmerga positions in Sinjar city. I guess Turkey wanted to attack the YPG, but they mistook the Peshmerga for that. On 15th of August 2018, Turkey killed one of the most prominent YPG commanders, Zeki Shingali, and they also injured Mazlum Shingali, the commander-in-chief of the YPG. This was particularly harmful also in a symbolic way because the attack the attack happened on the way back from a memorial celebration for the victims of the massacre in Kojo, the worst massacre committed by ISIS in a village in the southern region of Sinjar. And Zeki and Mazlum Shingali took part in this celebration on the way back. They were killed, and until now the question is who gave the information to the Turkish army in which car the two are. So they must have had some local intelligence as well. In November 2019, Turkey bombed Sinjar again, and 3 civilians were killed. On 15th of January 2020, they killed the media spokesperson, Serdash Shingali of the YPG. I showed you here a picture of Serdash because I know him quite well, and I met him in January 2019 in his headquarters there. And in June 2020, on 14th of June 2020, Turkey actually launched the largest attack on Sinjar against YPG and the Women's Defense Forces. And it's very interesting that this attack just happened a few days after about 250 families finally returned to Sinjar, which was the biggest group of returnees for a long time. And it's quite possible that Turkey purposely wanted to increase the feeling of insecurity and thus wanted to threaten Yazidis not to return to the region. So these permanent attacks of Turkey against Sinjar were never stopped by any international partner in the region. And they were also never, I mean, Iraq sometimes diplomatically protested, but Iraq as a nation state is a weak state and has not the ability to fight against the Turkish military, neither in Sinjar nor in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So I fear that these Turkish aggressions against Sinjar will continue, and they are they have different consequences. First of all, these attacks lead to a general insecurity that prevents civilians to return to their villages and to rebuild their houses. But the other consequence is also that some of the Yazidis who are not directly politically affiliated with one of the militias started to get annoyed about the presence of the Yevesh. And maybe this is also one of the intentions of Turkey, that they want the Yazidis think because of the presence of the Yevesh, Turkey is attacking them. And some of the Yazidis use this as an argument for to force the Yevesh to leave the region. But the Yevesh, although it is a pro-PKK force, it is a force of local Yazidis. So these are people from the region. And the old PKK cadres already left the region. So, for example, my friend Serdar Chingali, the guy you see here in the picture, he was a young man from a village in Shingal. So why should these people leave the region just because they're affiliated with the PKK? They're also a legal militia from the Iraqi perspective. The Yevesh is registered in Baghdad as under the law for the Hashtashabis, for the People's Mobilization Unit. So there's no way that these part of the Yazidi population of Shingal just should leave the region. However, I think one of the crucial questions for the future is if the Iraqi government finally would agree and manage to establish some kind of a unified self-administration of the whole region of Shingal, and if they would be able to create a kind of a unified self-defense force of the Yazidis that include the different militias and create a kind of a territorial defense force that is not just affiliated with one political party. So one of the solutions could be maybe to unify these different local Yazidi forces to a kind of common police force of a new Shingal territory or something like that. But even this seems to be very unrealistic at the moment, considering that Iraq has a lot of other problems and that the government in Baghdad just doesn't care a lot about this very peripheric region, actually. So, so I fear that these attacks will continue and that the political splits that exist in the region will be added by aggression from outsiders like Turkey. Thank you very much, and I hope that you still have a lot of questions and comments. The two books you see here is one is the German book that will be translated in English, I told you already, and the other one is the edition of 2016 of our Vienna yearbook for Kurdish studies. We have a yearbook published every year with German and English articles, and in 2016 the focus of the yearbook was on genocide of 2014. So if somebody of you knows German, there are also some English articles inside. These two books could be interesting. Thank you very much, and I hope you still have some questions and we have an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Can you clear the screen so that we can see people? See you, in fact. Perfect. I haven't got it so that people can use the chat, but you can stick your hand up or you can message me, and we will also monitor the Facebook. So if anybody's got any questions on Facebook, we've got a question here from Daban, and I will unmute you. Or has somebody done that? Yes.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Sarah.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah, just a minute. I think this mic is not working fine. So unfortunately, I missed the first part of this presentation. So because I sent an email to you, and I think you failed to respond to my email to send me the Zoom link. Anyway, but it was very, thank you to Keith to forward the link to me. It's a very interesting discussion and I really enjoyed it. At the same time, I'm really sad to see all this happening at this corner of much neglected in the world. I have one question to Thomas. My question is about the attitude of the Yazidi people towards the withdrawal of the Peshmerga forces at the dawn of the ISIS attack. I know you have been there and you talked to them. So I was wondering, what is the attitude of Yazidi people towards the argument of Padaka, which says that because of the geographical position of Shingal, the Peshmerga forces were not able to defend Shingal. So could you tell us something about this, how they found this argument, or what is their interpretation, or how they find this withdrawal? That would be amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Yes. Even Yazidis who are affiliated with the PDK see the withdrawal of the PDK Peshmerga as a betrayal. So even when you talk to Qasim Shesho, he sees that as a betrayal. At least if you talk privately with him. And the Yazidi members of the Peshmerga also, at least some of them stayed, like, and some of them stay until now. So there is not the division. The division is not just the division between Yazidis and the PDK, but also between the Yazidi members of the PDK and the Muslim members of the PDK. But nevertheless, although Yazidi PDK members from Shingal see that as a betrayal, they have explanations they have some stories why that happened. For example, they say it's not because of Masoud Barzani, it's because of some commander decided that. So they have some kind of explanations, and actually until now nobody exactly knows who decided that. There was never a proper investigation done about this. I personally can't imagine that Masoud Barzani did not know about it, but there are rumors going on in pro-PDK Yazidi circles from Shingal that this was a kind of betrayal of some Sunni commanders, and it's not Masoud who knew about it and decided about it. But I didn't meet anybody from Shingal who did not see it as a betrayal. The thing is this, maybe the Peshmerga could not defend the south of Shingal for a long period. That might be true. I'm not an expert on military questions. But what is sure is that the Peshmerga could have defended this region for 1 or 2 days at least, to make sure that the civilians can escape. And the Peshmerga did not do that. They even told the civilians in the villages that they will come, and they did not come. And I spoke to some of the men who tried to defend their villages with some Kalashnikovs against ISIS, and they told me that they were calling the Peshmerga headquarters, and the Peshmerga headquarters in Shingal said, no, wait, we will come. At a moment when they already withdrew. So the Peshmerga did not only withdraw, they lied to the civilians in some of the villages that they will come at a moment when they already withdrew their forces. So what they at least could have done is to defend the villages 1 more day. 1 more day would have been enough that the civilians could withdraw to the mountain or to Syria. And they did not do that. And this is something most, at least, of the Yazidis from Sinjar see like this. Nevertheless, that does not mean that all of them are now against the PDK. There are Yazidis who think that it would be better for Shingal to be part of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and it would be better that the PDK control Shingal and that they should get rid of the PKK because then Turkey would not attack the region anymore. So this is one of the positions that is there. But even those people consider the withdrawal of 2014 as a betrayal.
Thanks very much. And we've got Paul's got his hand up, and whoever it is that's no with an exclamation mark after that. So Paul, I'll unmute you. Oh, or you've muted yourself. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
After that, sorry.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk, Professor Schmidinger, and greetings to SSK, to Sarah, the Margarets, and the entire forum. So I realize, Professor Schmidinger, that the majority of the talk focused on here and the now, and the balance of power and those dynamics. I wanted to go a bit 1 step back and look at the 2014 genocide and what might be the ramifications of the moral aspect of the 2014 genocide in terms of how things are playing out today. Because we saw, whether it was the Jews after World War II, Bosnia, Rwanda, Kosovo, East Timor, many of the populations who were victim of genocide were granted a certain leeway that their rights of self-determination would be considered more seriously, given what they went through. And the puzzling aspect for me is that when your people is victim of genocide by Turkey or their allies, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., whether it's the Armenians of 100 years ago or the Yazidis of 2014, somehow that equation doesn't fully apply. And so the question is, how might we be able to use the argument of the genocide to, create a better situation for the Yazidis in terms of their rights of not continuing to be bombed by Turkey. I'm thinking also of a lot of the work of Yazdan Nadia Murad, who's a Nobel laureate. So how might that be able to be converted into a better situation for the Yazidis on the ground today? Thank you.
That's an important and difficult question. I think one of the big problems of Yazidi politics at the moment is really this disunity. And many of the Yazidi organizations are more busy with fighting each other than with creating at least a small political platform where they can agree upon. So one of the things they can agree is that they want to have some kind of autonomy within either Iraq or Kurdistan or whatever. I don't know any relevant force that would claim an independent state in Sinjar or something like that, but that they need some kind of unified and autonomous administration. But how that should look like, who should grant that? This is something Yazidis cannot agree upon each other. And the reason for this disunity is, in my opinion, and I think I told that somewhere in the presentation as well, that all these Yazidi political forces were very weak in 2014, and they needed support from outside, especially military support. So the YPG could not exist without the support of the PKK. The Hashd al-Shabis could not exist without the support of the government in Baghdad. The Peshmerga could not exist without Erbil. And the YPG was very weak because it did not have such many. So all the conflicts that exist in the region between Erbil and Baghdad, between Erbil and Kandil, and so on, are present in this micro-region as well. And this makes it extremely difficult for Shingali Yazidis to find a kind of common political platform. And even Nadia Murad, I mean, she's one of the prominent faces because she got the Nobel Prize, but she's there are many Yazidis who hate her. And who think that some think she's not Kurdish enough, some think she's not Yazidi enough. So there's a lot of debate within the Yazidi community going on about her as well. And so there is a problem within the Yazidi community about the leadership. And this is partly a result of this affiliation of different Yazidi groups with different supporters. It's partly also a result of the fact that the Yazidis of Shingal were, I mean, these were very simple peasants. And the older generation never went to school. There's still a lot of analphabets in the region. And although there are educated Yazidis, but most of them are in the diaspora or they don't live in Shingal anymore. So it's very difficult to establish such a political platform within the Yazidi community. And this gets even more difficult as many of the Yazidis who were a bit more educated and who had a little bit of money left Iraq. So the people that are left over are the less educated people, the less wealthy people who do not know how to play in the political arena. I'm sorry that this is not a very optimistic thing, but I fear that on the long run, I don't know if there is a future of a Yazidi existence in Kurdistan. Maybe it will be a diaspora region. Sarah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, the next question? No?
Oh, can you hear me? Hi, sorry. Maybe I just introduce myself first. My name's not No, it's Lucy Turnbull. And I've lived in Kurdistan for 4 years, actually. I lived there 2013 and 14 in Soran in Erbil, and I went back in 2018 and I worked in Rapidan, Rania, Kalatsa and Erbil. And I recently worked for a Barzani in Erbil. I have a big story to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you today. So I also worked in Thessaloniki with Yazidis in a IDP camp there. And I was just struck by your comment.
I can't hear you anymore. I don't know if
you're breaking up, Lucy.
I know how about PDK, but I heard a day. Hi, is that better?
Yes, it is. If we
better?
have problems with, yes. Can you say that bit again?
That's better. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I worked in Thessaloniki with the Yazidis in an IDP camp, and none of them expressed support for the PDK or the Peshmerga or for the Barzanis. And I'm just wondering, I know how much corruption and nepotism and intimidation happens in Kurdistan. I've worked in the education system and I've worked for Barzanis, as I said. And I'm wondering, when you said that there were some Yazidis that support the PDK, how can you be sure that, because a lot of people in the PDK also, they are intimidated. They can't really say exactly what they think or how they feel, because basically their lives could be threatened.
The sound is gone again, but
general within the public
understood the question.
Kurdistan. So when you say, I find it very.
Sorry, I think we've lost the sound, but I think we've got the gist of your question.
Yeah, I got the question, I think. You know, people support the PDK for different reasons. Some people support them because they get money from the Barzanis, and it is a feudal system. Some support it for fear because they live or they have families in the IDP camps in the Hook. I showed you the pictures of the meeting they made in May 2017, where they really, I would say they threatened people supporting the Hashd service. So support does not mean that all of them love them, but there are Yazidis who also gain something from supporting the PDK. And I know some of the Yazidis who tell me that some of the PDK Yazidis who are supporting the PDK because they are afraid of the PDK told me that they are more afraid from some of the Yazidi PDK facts than from the Muslim PDK members. So yes, fear is one of the reasons for some people to support them, but also gaining position and jobs. So it's a classical, I would say it's a classical feudal situation. I cannot tell you how many people of the Yazidis from Shingal support the PDK. I cannot tell you exactly for what reasons they support the PDK. The only serious thing we know is that at the elections for the Iraqi parliament, a relatively independent guy got elected and not a PDK Yazidi. But for the Yazidis who live inside the territory that is controlled by the PDK, some kind of cooperation with the PDK is the only way to get a job and things like that. So this might be the reason as well why they support the PDK. But you know, I also know people in Austria who become member of a political party because they want a job. So this is not something we only know from there.
Sorry, I said yes, thank you. I agree. I just find in the way that the Western people, when we say we support a political party, we usually mean that we support their policies and their ideology and their ethos and their plans for the country. But when you say it in Kurdistan, it really means I will agree with anything you say as long as you do something that benefits me. And I think that's what that's what you're saying. Is that right?
I agree. I mean, we are not talking about Europe. We're talking about Iraq.
Yes. Thank you.
And I think Hanifi has got a question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much for this very elaborate and detailed presentation. I'm also waiting for the book to come up. Will be very much useful and very good to have a sense of what's going on there. But I want to continue somehow from the question that actually Paul asked, because I don't think I think we can talk on it in a bit more detail, because when you talk about the issue of division between the Kurds or the Kurdish factions and parties in the context of Shingal or in the context of Iraqi Kurdistan or in the context of Rojava, I think this comes as an issue, as the probably principal issue, as you have pointed out, but it somehow sounds like blaming the victim at some points, because although Iraqi Kurdistan, you know, mostly most of the population voted yes for an independent Kurdistan, the international community didn't support them, or the superpowers didn't support them, and because of real politics, you know, they didn't have the will or the power to follow through. Or when it comes to Rojava, although they are, you know, quite united, you know, as united as they can be actually, but because of the attacks from Turkey, they cannot, you know, either be in Geneva in the talks about the Syrian constitution, or secure a political or legal status within Syria. So the issue is not really the division between Kurds per se, it's also the double standard of the international community, specifically of the superpowers, and the attacks, especially by Turkey, in the case of Rojava, for instance. And probably it will come down to that point when something similar happens in Shingal. So I think we also have to discuss how regional powers, superpowers, and the international community are actually exacerbating or perpetuating this division that already exists, but they are not, you know, coming together and putting some kind of legal or political status for the Kurds, like they did in Kosovo, or like they did in other parts of the world for other peoples or for other stateless nations. So yes, there is a division in Kurdistan and within groups and factions or parties in Kurdistan, but this is not really, for me, the main issue that that is the main obstacle in front of the Kurds to autonomy or to independence. It's the double standard of the international community, and especially the attacks of Turkey or other states in the region. for instance, Iran. So I don't know if we can continue discussing this, continuing from the question that Paul asked. For my question is also a bit related to that. So how do you see the role of international community, regional and superpowers in that, in the stateless, the statusless of the Kurds, not statelessness, but the fact that they don't have, in 3 parts of Kurdistan, they don't have a status. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your statement and your question. You know, I didn't want to blame anybody. I wanted to understand why are these divisions so present here. And I think the main reason is this dependence on rival forces in the region for the Yazidis. But to a certain point, you can say the same for the whole Kurdish situation, you know, because the PDK is economically depending on Turkey, while the PUK in Iraq was depending on Iran, and the PKK actually had to come to some terms with Iran recently because of the attacks of Turkey. So the situation for Kurdish actors is very difficult, you know, and I do not want to blame the Yazidi militias, and I do not want to blame the Kurdish actors actually, but you know, it's clear for me that neither the Americans nor the Russians want to create any kind of Kurdish state one day. So this is, if we wait, or if we ask for international support for that, we wait until the end of the time. You know? So yes, we can blame the US for not supporting the Kurds, but this is somehow obvious for me that they don't do that. And I mean, you know, I'm a person that was banned from entering the United States last year because I tried to present my book on Afrin there. So, so I'm not a fan of the U.S. government at all. But if I discuss with you here, with the people who are supportive to the Kurds and to the Yazidis, I think it makes more sense to discuss Kurdish politics than international politics, because it's obvious that neither the US government nor the Russian government nor China is a human rights organization who supports oppressed people. You know? They are for their own interests. And having said that, I have to say that yes, many people voted for independence in Iraqi Kurdistan, but you know, the Americans told Barzani from the beginning on that he shouldn't do that and that he will be not supported. So this was not a surprise at all. And I can remember that 2 weeks before the referendum, I had a talk at the American University of Kurdistan in Dohuk, not an official talk. I was invited by a friend to discuss with her students. And I told them, in my opinion, this will be a complete failure. You cannot reach independence like that because first you have to establish unified, reliable political structures within Iraq. And then you can try to negotiate with Iraq, or you don't negotiate, but you cannot establish an independent state when you don't even have the support of half of your own country, because you couldn't see a single poster for the referendum in Sulaymaniyah. So and you don't even know the territory you want to have. So this, in my, I still don't know why Barzani did the referendum at this moment of time. I fear that he strongly overestimated the influence of Israel, because Netanyahu was actually the only guy who told him we support Kurdish. Maybe this was the reason. Maybe it was an attempt to get over the constitutional crisis, because don't forget, Barzani was at this moment officially not the president of Iraqi Kurdistan anymore, but he still stayed in power and just didn't leave the office. So and maybe the other reason, or one of the reasons, was also that some of his international advisors, like Bernard Kouchner, told him, yes, do it. Now is the moment to become independent. But whatever the reason was, for me, I'm sorry, but it was obvious that this will be a failure. And this is not blaming the victim again, but I you know, as a friend of the Kurds, I would not talk like that if I would ever have the chance to talk to Mr. Trump, you know. But I'm talking here in a pro-Kurdish audience, and I think to analyze what led to the situation we have now might be more helpful for any kind of liberation than to blame the superpowers that they are not so nice to establish a Kurdish state or a Shingali state or whatever.
Can I ask you a question about the superpower all the same, Thomas? Because I was wondering what you see, what you think that the US is doing at the moment in trying to bring together these discussions with Iraq, with Bashar, and with Turkey in discussing the future of Sinjar. I mean, they seem to be discussing it between them at the moment.
Yeah, that's very, very difficult to say. I think that the solution of the Sinjar problem can be only part of a larger discussion. I think at the moment there's a lot going on behind the scene, because both Turkey, but also the PKK is in a crisis, and the PDK. And to continue like that is very difficult for all sides economically. So it's even possible that we will have new negotiations between Turkey and the Kurds in the future. I don't know. The problem with the US is that we have to do it with a very unreliable partner there, you know. So as long as Trump is in power, although some of the US diplomats in the region are very educated, and some of them are even sympathetic to the Kurds, but as long as Trump is in power, there's always the big question mark if the US policy in the region would not change immediately the next day with the next tweet of the president. So I think from the Kurdish side, the best thing is to somehow keep what they have until we have another US president that might be more reliable and that might have strategy. At the moment, I don't see such a strategy, despite that they want to keep the Syrian oil somehow, or something like this. I don't think that the Chingal is any priority for US politics at the moment. That's a little bit different for Iraq as a whole. But even the Iraq policy is strongly dominated by the Iranophobia of the present US government. And in Syria, Russia has the much better cards at the moment. And I think Russia will be much more crucial for the future of the Syrian Kurds than the US, because the US is losing influence in the region.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on the talks that have just happened today that with Russia and with the people from northeast Syria. I mean, they seem to, there was reports of them all, well, pictures of them showing them all seeming to be getting on quite well. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's too early to comment that, but it's clear for me that any kind of solution with the government of Syria goes through Russia. So Russia is the hegemon in the region. And of course, I always told my Rojava friends, it's important that you talk with the Russians, because they have all the cards in their hand at the moment. But of course, this is difficult for the self-administration as well, because the US doesn't want them to talk with the Russians. So, and they're on the same time depending on the US. So it's a very delicate situation for them. However, I mean, there are some signs that Russia has some plans for Syria. There are some signs that Russia might even change the Syrian president with the next regular elections in Syria, presidential elections. Because Putin, or the Russian government, is not very happy with Bashar al-Assad either. Bashar is somehow balancing between Russia and Iran, and overestimates his own importance. And Bashar has too much blood on his hands. So Russia somehow won the war, but Russia cannot rebuild Syria. Russia needs European money, maybe even US money, to rebuild Syria. And it will be very difficult for Europe to fund anything in Syria as long as Bashar al-Assad is in power. So maybe, but it's really just a speculation. And I'm talking to some of the Russians as well, and some of them think that this could be a solution, that they put another regime guy with less blood on his own hands to power in Syria, and that he could then negotiate some kind of a federal solution with the Kurds. And this would enable Europe to invest in rebuilding Syria or something. So maybe this would be a solution. I mean, the next elections are 2021, I think. So this could be a solution for the next years. But for the self-administration, the really delicate thing is, on one hand, that they have to balance between Russia and the US, because if they talk, I mean, if they're coming too close to the Russians, the US will be angry and could withdraw the support. If they, but at the same time, depending on the US. And the second delicate question for the self-administration of North and East Syria is also that the split between self-administration and Kandil occurs, and it becomes visible. You might remember that Jamal Bayek made a tweet where he criticized the deal of the self-administration with an American oil company. And now there was also a statement by the co-leader of the KCK that criticized the self-administration. So they also have to balance between the Americans and Kandil. So this is highly sophisticated diplomacy and not easy to solve for the self-administration.
No, we're asking a lot of crystal ball gazing as well. I think it's really. I'm getting long messages from Margaret Owen about how complicit the UK is in all this. I don't know if she wants me to read it out, but I will just read a little bit of the UK needs to be blamed as a key arms trader in the area as well, and refusing to condemn Turkey's war crimes very definitely, absolutely.
I agree. I think Germany is even more important than Britain concerning that. I mean, Germany is the European supporter of Turkey, but yes, also Britain is. I think Britain is playing a more important role in Iraq already in the last years, as the former colonial power of Iraq. What shall I add?
Margaret, I'm getting requests to let you speak directly, so Paul's very keen you should speak.
Here I am, Margaret Owen, unfortunately living in a country that I am so ashamed of. And now that we've come out of Brexit in the most disgusting way, we will go anywhere to sell arms to regimes which actually, authoritarian, terrible regimes, which are actually committing war crimes. And I feel, I really liked, it was you, Hanifi, wasn't it? Or one of you that was talking about the responsibility of who the hell is the international community? Who the hell is the UN? I mean, just 3 weeks ago, the UN envoy, what's his name, can't remember, brokered this new meeting, but the 3 participants all got tested for COVID-19. So it didn't happen because they all had to go into quarantine. But there they were talking to Syria, Iran, and Russia. And the Kurds weren't there, and the Yazidis weren't there. I mean, nobody else was there. And there weren't any women, of course. I just think that all this is going on. There's almost a vested interest in having everyone so divided, even within. I mean, I'm fascinated, Thomas. Everything that you had to say, I found it absolutely riveting. And thank you so much for explaining why the Yazidis themselves are split and why some are with one side and some are with the other, and how all the people who are left really have to think, where am I safest? Where am I safest? And of course, many of them think they're safest if they are with the KRG. But I also wanted to ask you, anyway, I go on and on in my own country, going on and on at my government about when will it stop? You talk about Germany, but it's the UK that is most vassal to Turkey, that actually hosts with Turkey arms fairs in London. I mean, we will do anything now because we're looking for trading partners. We're never going to say a word about Turkey when we actually talk about the Kurds as if they are terrorists. We don't want to know. We still call them separatists, although they made it quite clear since 2015 that the Kurds want human rights and freedom for everybody. They don't want to change international borders. But anyway, so I'm just saying that I think we have a lot to answer for, and it's civil society that's got to push all our governments to actually stop supporting regimes like Assad or Modi in India or Netanyahu in Israel or Erdogan in Turkey. But my question is, and I'm fascinated because of course I've met the Nobel Prize winner. I've met her often in London and in New York, and you said that she's actually become a hate figure. And of course, we as women's organizations are always thinking so much about the women who escaped from 6 years of sexual slavery. And then they get their refugee camp bombed by Turkey. But can you just clarify what you think we can be doing as women for all those women who are in Al-Hol camp, which is a nightmare camp? I mean, it's horrendous. It's sort of dystopian. And I wondered if you could tell us what you think that we can do as international women's organizations all over the world. And I particularly work on widows. And you mentioned the widows, but there are many women in that camp who are probably half widows, who don't know what happened to their families. And in a peculiar way, they're not even widows because they couldn't be married to the jihadist fighters because they were infidels. But can you just clarify why she's such a hate figure? Because we're full of admiration for her. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Maybe I was a bit misunderstanding what I said. I didn't want to claim that she's a hate figure. I wanted to say that some Yazidis hate her. There are Yazidis who accuse her for. She always talks just about Yazidis and is very distanced towards Kurdish identity. And when she did her talk, her speech after she got the Nobel Prize, she was strongly criticized for speaking in Arabic, for example. She was strongly criticized for focusing only on her Yazidi identity and not on her Kurdish identity. So from Yazidis who are closer to a pro-Kurdish identity, that does not necessarily and only mean a pro-PDK identity. Yeah, she became, for some of them, a hate figure, for some of them just somebody to criticize. The second thing is that she became, but this is a problem many Nobel laureates have, that she became quite a celebrity and inaccessible for many Yazidi activists, even for some who supported her a lot. So she became a bit a star that is, and she's not reachable for many people anymore, which also caused a lot of conflict. But I really didn't want to say that she's a hate figure for the Yazidis. There are some Yazidis who are very proud of her, and I think the Nobel Prize helped a lot, as the Sakharov Prize for her and for Lamia also played an important role. So I just say that even she's not an integrative figure that is respected by all Yazidis. Some of them love her, some of them like her, some of them criticize her, some of them hate her. And all the other things you said, I couldn't agree more than that. You know, I think I made my talk as a political scientist and not as an activist, although I am also an activist, and then when I'm talking at a demonstration, my talk is a little bit different maybe than the talk I gave here. So I try to analyze the situation, and that should be helpful for the activists as well, you know. But of course, one of the few things you can do in Britain or in whatever country you are at the moment is to make pressure on your own governments not to support regimes like the Turkish regime or the Syrian regime, and to be open for refugees. And concerning Al-Hol, I think one of the really disasters is also how Europe dealt with their own citizens that are in a hole and who became perpetrators. There are hundreds of Europeans sitting in these camps, and nearly none of the states repatriated them. The only state that repatriated all of them was Kosovo. In Austria, in my country, I personally searched for some of these for the children of one of the Austrian citizens, and we found them, and it was a tremendous work to put pressure on the Austrian government to bring back a 3 and 1.5-year-old child that is an Austrian citizen. You know, these were the only 2 Austrian citizens that were brought back. So, not to talk about the adults. And I'm not saying that because because I think that these criminals need our support. It's the other way around. Why should the courts have to deal with these people? Why don't we take also the perpetrators back and put them on trial here? The self-administration will be completely. They don't have the resources to trial these people in Rojava, and even if they would trial them, what will they do with them afterwards? Should they imprison these people for, and we're talking about thousands of people, you know? Should they imprison them for the next 80 years? And what should they do with the children? These children are still growing up in a jihadi environment. And this is a ticking time bomb. I'm sorry for that, but so the European nation states actually say these are our citizens, but yeah, it's not our deal. Do whatever you want. And I think this is a completely irresponsible way of dealing with the problem. And I think, yeah, one of the few things we can do outside of Kurdistan is to put pressure on governments not to sell weapons to these regimes, to have a different refugee policy towards people who really need to flee from the region. And to be honest, these women we are talking about, they don't have a future in Iraq. These are really people who can only have a new life in a state where their religious affiliation or sectarian affiliation and the sectarian affiliation of their children are not an issue. And this is in Europe. And also put pressure on your states to take up the responsibility for the criminals of British, Austrian, German, French origin who were perpetrators. I mean, I'm sorry, this is not something the courts have to deal with.
Thank you very much for saying that. And we should all be taking back all those children and women who came from our countries, were groomed in our countries, and they have to come back to our countries and face justice there, because they can't possibly do that in Rojava. They can't do it, and they have to look after so many people. And now it's even worse because of COVID, and we know what's happening in Al-Hol camp, where some of the ISIS women are saying that, oh, if you're an infidel, you won't get it if you're an infidel or a non-Muslim, you're the only, and so they don't even dare even go to even access any sort of health. They're so frightened. It must be, I think it's unbelievable the power that the ISIS women have in controlling Al-Hol camp. So it's really very urgent. And it was completely against the international law when we took away citizenship from Shamim Begum, because that is again against the international law to make someone stateless. And some countries have taken people back. I think France, Denmark, Russia, and Germany, I think, has taken them back. But that's what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I know we've got people with their hands up, but I've also realized that we've been going for 2 hours, and I think that Thomas probably needs a break. So I think I'll just ask him if he's wants to have any final words about anything before we wind
okay.
up.
I mean, if there is an important question, we can continue, and I open my first beer meanwhile. But but if you're not, you have a nice cat in your back. I like that one as well. Sarah, your cat is beautiful. Okay, now my final words. If there's one hand up, maybe we should accept that.
Lucy,
one.
you want to?
One more question, yes?
Yes, I'd love to ask another question if that's possible. Can you hear me okay this time?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, one
okay,
last question.
It's about the Okay, thank you very much. It's about the UN actually, and I think it's quite a pertinent question at the moment, considering Brexit is about to happen and Scotland is on the verge of another independence referendum. When I was in Kurdistan, I used to work in Sri Lanka and Jaffna.
No, now I don't hear you anymore.
We've lost you. Do you want to type it?
Yes, type it. Type it.
Type your question.
Write it to the chat.
Sorry, we can't get your question at all. We can't hear you. You're cutting out. Would you like to write? Would you like to write it to the chat?
Okay, I will write it.
We've got an interesting question from Paul as well for a future about what would happen, what should happen to the Turkish citizens in Al-Hol that can't be sent back to Turkey, where they'd probably be given medals of honor. So what's the solution there?
That's a good question. I don't know what.
Actually,
my question is about the UN.
It's quite a long question, and I'm on my. I'll try and say my question, and if I cut out again, it's okay.
Yeah,
we don't have to do it.
Okay, if you don't have to do it, and I can't read it.
I think we'll have to leave it, but
okay, then I really just say a few words at the end. I want to repeat once more that I think activism, if it's based on knowledge and an analysis of the different actors on the ground, it helps also the activism we need to do. And of course, one of the targets of activism are our national governments. And it makes a difference if these governments continue to support the Turkish government, or if they start to establish relations to the existing Kurdish entities that are here, or if they even would start to convince the Iraqi government to establish some kind of an entity within Iraq for the Yazidis and the other minorities in Sinjar. So I think one of the other things that we really can do in Europe is just to keep the topic in the public discussion, because my impression is that the Shingal issue completely disappeared from the public media, but also from political discourses. Somehow this genocide happened, then we had the Nobel Prize, and now nobody cares if the majority of the survivors of the genocide are still living in tents or if they get bombed and so on. So I think one of the things you all really can do is to keep the topic alive. That's one of the reasons why I wrote this book and why I also tried to find funding for the translation. But I don't want just to promote the book, although I would be happy if you would read it in English afterwards. But I think there must be different levels of attention, or let's try to continue to inform journalists. Let's try to keep it a topic in political discussions. So let's keep it alive with protests and so on. I think the title of my book, "The World Has Forgotten Us," this was one of the sentences many of the Yazidis told me in the camps, and they really have the feeling that they're alone, and they're right. And this is one of the reasons why voices of people in Britain, in Scotland, but all over the world are important, also to show the people in the region that they're not completely alone. So I really appreciate that you made this, that you organized this online lecture. And I hope that also in your continuing work, the situation of Shingal will play an important role as well. Thank you very much, and thank you for the interesting discussion.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks indeed. Thank you very much for being with us, and we look forward to the book coming out in English.
Okay, bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
To read the
Thank
book.
you. Bye.